Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome to the Rant Live, Friday, January 28th, 2022. Welcome, Evan.
Hola.
How are you?
You know, it's I guess it's a Friday.
It is.
It's been actually cold here for several days. You know, today is downright balmy. We've got about half an inch of snow, but it's like 28, 29. And like the other day when I got up to and I'm thankful every day now that I have a remote start on my car, but it's like through the app on my phone.
Critical.
Yeah, so like I don't even have to go downstairs, get my keys or anything. I just wake up and I take my daughter, one or the other. I drop one of the kids off or the other. Like the bus stop for our neighborhood is at the other side. Like we live right near one entrance to the neighborhood, but the bus picks up at the opposite entrance, which is like a mile away, you know, 3/4 mile, whatever. And so I either drop my daughter off at the school bus stop every morning, or I'll drop my son off at middle school, depending on the timing. And so I'll kind of roll out of bed. I can start my car. It'll stay on for 15 minutes with that. And it's perfect because I get in there, and when you kick that thing on, it turns on the steering wheel heater and the heat warmers.
Ooh.
And
yeah, I was going to ask if you had the steering wheel heater because that's critical.
It is. So the seats are warm, the steering wheel is warm, and the defrost is kicked on because it's got. So I'm like, it is a game changer because like our garage is too full of crap, so my car is outside. And so it is. It's wonderful. It's actually like so. I only have to be outside for about.
It's like delightful. Like
seconds.
you look forward to getting in the car in the morning.
It's really not that bad because all I've got to do is walk outside. So the other day it was like -12 wind chill, and I was like, this isn't too bad. Then I dropped my daughter off, and she's got to sit outside because like the bus shows up. They're like, okay, so the bus is supposed to show up at 7:18. Like they sent a whole letter home. It's like the timing was 7:20, and then it was like, now it's 7:18. And they said, but you know, have your child there 5 minutes early. So the first day we leave the house and I'm pulling out, like I pull out. I don't go through the neighborhood because if I did, I wouldn't actually see the bus. And the way it worked out is I pull out and I'm like, oh crap, that's your bus. Like it's passing us on the street coming by.
Did you pull a Starsky and Hutch? Like right in front of the bus?
But thank God there was no car behind it. So I just, whoom, it just busted right in behind the thing. And as it stops, it pulls into the turn, thank goodness, to stop. And I pull in right behind it. I'm like, that's go, go, go. And she's running out the car. And the guy's about to pull away because she's not there. Because some mornings my wife will take her earlier. She's got drama or something like that. And so he's not sitting there waiting. And she's the only kid that gets picked up at the stop. So
like a lone car pulling up should signal to the bus driver that.
Well, but I could have been just, you know, turning, although it'd be weird for me to have gone past one entrance to the subdivision and pull into the other. But I'm sure he's not, you know, checking for a tail. But what's funny is though that was the first morning. He said, you know, it'll be here at 7:18, and it was like 7:15, right? So it's even 3 minutes before that. I'm like, don't tell me it's going to be here. I mean, I understand, you know, have your child there 15 minutes or 5 minutes early, and I'm like, that's neat, but like the first morning you say it's going to be like, don't tell me 7:18 if it's going to be here at 7:50. So now it's that much earlier. So anyway, it's like every morning now is basically like, hurry up and get ready, because we got to get out the door because I don't want to have your bus freaking leave you. And then me have to, even though like the high school is actually probably just as close to us as where her bus stop is, all things considered. But to get somebody there, the infrastructure is such that there's like one tiny little road that goes into the high school. And it's a big school. It's like 4,000 or 5,000 students. And so the traffic to drive your car a half mile or 3/4 mile to the high school entrance takes like half an hour. Because they got cops controlling anyway. So that was a much longer story than anybody cares to listen to. But that's like what my mornings are. So like I leave and then I come back. But it's great because I actually get a much earlier start on the day than what I would otherwise if I just like laid in bed, you know, longer and slept as long as I wanted to. So, you know, I get a lot of my writing done at that point. You know, I'll get up and check stuff or do some editing and that sort of thing. So yeah, it works out. And nice. You know, it was nice. It wasn't snowing yet this morning, so I didn't have to deal with that.
Cool. Well, yeah,
anyway.
I mean, that conversation progressed just about as quickly as the CBA talks are.
Yeah, except I actually got something done. So I actually did.
Like got to a point where we could all understand what was happening and comprehend.
Yeah, the bus driver didn't get in a fight with me or anything, or although it does kind of feel like, hey, we'll be there at 7:18. And I'm like, how about 7:20? And then they're like, how about 7:13? I'm like, well, how about screw you? That's kind of what that's more like the CBA. They just keep throwing numbers back and forth and not actually agreeing on anything.
Yeah. So speaking of the CBA, it's just kind of like you don't even really need to understand what's going on. I mean, if you've paid attention to baseball for any amount of time through, these different labor kind of things, the most recent being back to just last year when the COVID thing happened. And it's like, they're not going to agree on anything, but it's kind of like this time is like feels like even worse because it's like, not only are they not agreeing on anything, but they're not really even, it's not really even clear what the differences are. I mean, they seem really small to me, at least. Like it seems like if they wanted to, they could get this done tomorrow. And maybe it goes to what you were saying earlier, where they're just trying to shorten that free agent period. I mean, they've successfully done that, but now they're getting into a point where not only are they threatening spring training, but they're threatening the regular season. Doesn't make any sense.
And it's weird, because it does feel like, and the players, they backed off of the age-based free agency thing where they wanted to get it at 30 and a half and scale it back to 29 and a half, where you could guarantee, and it was a certain number of years, like as long as you had X number of years, you definitely, and it was 5, they wanted to bring that down from 6. They gave up on that. So, and the owners gave up on their proposal, or so it sounds, to change arbitration and do, the whole like war-based or some kind of algorithm-based thing. So, so both sides apparently have agreed in that regard that like free agency would remain the same. You've got your standard 6 years of control. They were going to do away with the Super 2 and have this other Elite 2 or something like that. Like that's gone. So that's one which seemed like a big sticking point, right? So that's done. The players backed off of that. I know they were going to try to do some changes with like the competitive balance stuff and the revenue sharing, because they wanted to, back that away and have it so the teams wouldn't just keep getting a bunch of money to be small markets and all that. I don't know what the exact specifics of it were, to be honest, right now, but I know they backed off of that. And I know also there's an agreement on establishing a separate bonus pool for some of the top free agents, which again, I think would kind of, I think the goal there is to sort of create a little bit more money for the younger guys. Like at the end of the day, but if you said, hey, the players are giving up on free agency and they're giving up on one of their other big ones, which would be the competitive balance or the rev share, what's left? And it would appear that the biggest issues, the one is just higher pay for the younger players, because realistically, if you think about it, that's what impacts more people than, because a lot of guys don't even make it through 6 years to become a free agent in the first place. A vast majority of the guys who play, think about how many players come up and they might stick around for a couple years. Their career might only last a year or two. Maybe they just bounce back and forth and they'll never actually get to that point where free agency matters, right? So for them, having a higher minimum, and that's going to make a huge difference for a guy. Let's just say, for instance, someone who I think will be a guest on the show soon, Scott Effross, probably next week. He came up with the Cubs, debuted and got a few weeks in. That's a lot of money for a dude who's been in the minors for several years. Even if you only make it up for 3 weeks, it's like $80,000, right? And if that's the only, maybe that's the only time you ever play, and I think he'll stick around for longer than that. He's on the 40-man still, but for guys like that, that might be more money than they just made for literally an entire professional career of playing in the minors. I mean, if you're only making like $10,000 a year, so that's huge. But the other thing I think that's the bigger sticking point is, where does the competitive balance tax come in? Where do those thresholds fall? The owners haven't wanted to push things there. The players want a $750,000 minimum salary. Owners, I think, have only bounced up to $610,000, which is still pretty good over what was it, $570,500, I think is what it is. So, but here's the sticking point: is the owners said they want to lock it in at that level for those whole first 3 years pre-arbitration, to where even if a team wanted to give a guy a raise, they could not. So they said, well, we'll have a bonus pool if they, earn certain awards or meet certain WAR thresholds, but a team can't even give you a raise, which it just seems like a really stupid thing in the first place. Like, why would you stop a team from giving a guy a raise if he wanted? If the team wants to, who
Yeah, that
cares?
doesn't make any sense. I mean, if they've got a soft cap or whatever you want to call it, and they're within that range, I mean, what is it? Yeah, that doesn't make. It's like, is that even a sticking point though?
Well, I think it's more that the owners are saying, yeah, we'll increase the minimums, but that's where it's going to stop. So I don't necessarily think they're looking at it saying although, well, maybe they are, some of them. I don't think they're necessarily, though, trying to say you can't give a guy a raise. I think it's more like, yeah, we'll increase the minimum, but it's going to lock in for 3 years, which would be dumb. But I do think some of them probably look at that and say, there's potential, right? If you have an organization, let's say that makes it a practice of rewarding guys with a raise, a salary increase of $250,000, $500,000 each of those first 3 years, just out of the goodness of their hearts, right? Which I don't know is really a thing we could ever say about MLB owners, but it's just a phrase. And that guy's in it. Well, if you're talking about maybe undrafted free agents, if you're talking about signing a guy to a bonus who you drafted, might at that organization have a little bit more credence to be able to get away with a lower bonus, underslot some of these guys and have them sign with them, knowing that, hey, we'll make it up to you, because if you make it to the show, you're going to get an extra $250,000 and then an extra $500,000. So, I don't know that makes sense, but I'm just saying if an organization kind of, I don't even know the word I'm looking for here, but gives itself a good reputation, right? Ingratiates itself, if you will, with agents and players because of the way they treat those young guys, might they be able to perhaps woo some other free agents just because of that? I don't know, but I think that is something where teams probably look at it and say, a team like the A's or the Rays or whatever that's a little more thrifty might think that a team like the Red Sox or the Yankees or the Dodgers could take advantage of such a system and woo other players just based on that, which I think is, I don't know that that's what anybody's actually thinking. And if they were, to me, that's asinine, because you're talking about, a total of a couple $1 million here or there for some of those players that come up. So, but
that
think
wouldn't limit players from doing like they did with David Bodie, for example, where they said, all right, we're just going to buy out your arbitration years and give you
right. They can still
a
extend them.
contract.
Yeah, you can still get an extension, because that wasn't a raise. That was a whole new extension that he signed. It'd be more like Chris Bryant got a raise, pre-arbitration got a raise to $1 million or whatever it was in his second year, I think. And he became technically like the highest paid second year player ever, even though it was like really his third year, because, being Super 2 and all that stuff. And it was which is like, yeah, you just got Rookie of the Year. I mean, you should be making a lot of money. Like that's something you should be opened up to. But you also have the guys like Wander Franco from the Rays, who without a year of service time, he just signed that whatever it was, $100-some million extension, right? So, which is weird. We just talked about the Rays being kind of thrifty, but now you've got a guy who didn't even have a full year of service time, who got a huge raise, very different because of it being an extension. But there again, it makes me wonder, what some of these teams are thinking, and maybe they're scared of that. Maybe they just worry that that teams will start doing extensions like that, and it'll be hard for them to compete. I don't know. I don't really understand it, because when you think about it, baseball, as much, and I know people look at this, they're like, that's still a great minimum. I'll take $570,000. Well, of course you will, but again, you're not one of the elite performers in a sport that takes in $15 billion a year or whatever it is. But baseball players have the lowest minimum salary of any of the four major professional sports, men's professional sports anyway. So, I mean, football, let's see, I have it in here somewhere. The NFL, I think, is, let's see, NBA is $925,000. The NHL is $750,000, and NFL is $660,000. Now it makes sense because the NFL, they got 53 players on a roster. But when you think about it, 53 players on a roster, that's more than twice what they've got in baseball. And baseball is still $90,000 behind them. And you're talking about playing a 162 game schedule. So I would imagine there should be a little bit more room in there. If you're talking about 26 guys on a roster, for them to be able to bump that up to $700,000, $750,000, whatever, with relative ease. Because I mean, how many guys on your roster are you dealing with? I know that's a lot of players, but you're talking about another 200 grand per player. Okay, there's another 2 million at most, even if you're looking at having 8 of those guys, 8 minimum players on your roster. Even if you have half of your roster as minimum guys, you're talking about $3 million additionally, just based on that. So that's something teams could easily swallow across the board and should not impact the guys at the top at all. But again, that's what they want to subsidize these top players with, right? Because for every Justin Verlander and Carlos Correa and guys like that, there are another however many, 40 or 50 guys making the minimum to be able to subsidize that, and the number is growing because teams want to be able to kind of, and that's what kind of sucks. The guys in the middle get squeezed a little bit. That was like a long tangential kind of rambling, but
no, but but it's kind of that seems to be the main sticking point. Like, right, it really seems to be all around, how owners compensate these younger guys, right? I mean, like, doesn't that seem to be the main issues? I mean, if I look at everything that I've seen discussed, that seems like it, right?
More or less. I mean, like I said, outside of, do they try to implement a salary floor, which they should, but the owners won't do a floor without a cap, and the players don't want a cap. So that, that could end up being kind of screwy in where they put that. But yeah, I mean, it's because the owners know they need superstars. They know they're going to still have to pay a ton of money for those guys at the top. But if you do that, you're going to have to then have enough guys who are coming up who you're only paying, $500,000 to, $600,000 to. So then that balances out. And by the time that happens, if you get enough of those guys who are coming up, who are young, who are within those first 3 and 4 years in the league, then you can balance it a little bit more easily. And we've talked about that with the Cubs, how they were never able to do that with pitching. They weren't able to get up enough young pitchers to offset what they were paying the older guys there. And that, again, based on what they wanted their budget to be, that hurt them a little bit or a lot bit. But yeah, it's weird though. Like that's where you're stuck. Like you can't get a little more flexible with that. Like the owners can't come back and say, yeah, hey, we'll go to a $650,000 minimum and we'll establish this bonus pool for some of these guys. And yeah, if you want to give them raises, cool. I mean, to me, that seems like or increase it each year. Hey, it'll be 625 next year, then 650, then 675, then 700, and it goes up a little bit each time. Like to me, that's a win for both sides, right? You scale into it, the players get close to what they want, and then it all makes a little bit more sense. But
But again, it doesn't seem to me that just doesn't feel like a really huge issue.
It shouldn't be, but I think the owners are dragging their feet intentionally on some of this stuff.
Exactly. And so that's the thing that really kind of annoys me when you look at how this is all playing out, right? I mean, to the players, the value to the players starts once the regular season begins, because then they start getting paid, right? They start earning their salary, so to speak. The longer it takes for the regular season to start, the less they get paid, right? Like the longer it takes them to actually start collecting a check, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But the owners on the back end, that's where they make all the money. So the owners could, like with COVID, could wait forever. Now, of course, they want fans in the stands, and that will happen. So that's not really an issue. Whereas in COVID, that was the issue. But they expanded the playoffs, and that's where the bulk of revenue comes from for a lot of teams and a lot of owners. And so they are fine just kind of kicking the can down the road and making the players suffer. And where we talk about the majority of baseball players are kind of, at the lower end of the scale, the salary scale, if you're just, listen, I mean, these are guys who have, been in the minors for years. They've dedicated their lives. They haven't been getting paid anything. The majority of players in baseball, not the big superstars. And they're guys that they need the money to be able to, like, go to the grocery store, to pay for their mortgage, to do the things that like every other person does. And so the longer it takes for them to get money, it's like it becomes kind of difficult for them to be able to manage that. And that's what the owners are. And that's what makes me so mad, is that when the owners are purposely trying to take advantage of that situation to be able to gain leverage in negotiations over matters that seem like they're at this point pretty easy to overcome. It's like they're just trying to squeeze every last bit of blood they can out of this thing. And I don't know, it just doesn't feel like I don't know. It's frustrating to me.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I mean, they want to break the union, right? And the thing is, the guys that they want to squeeze, as you mentioned, are the younger ones or the less experienced ones, you know, because Patrick Wisdom is making the minimum, but he's not very young. But then the players who are on the executive committee are not in that boat, right? They're your Clayton Kershaws, your Max Scherzers, and guys like that who, and the player reps even are not as much in that same category, right? They may not be making $50 million a year or anything, but they're still a lot more comfortable and have a lot more things going on, whether it be just their straight salary, investments, and just security of having been in the league for a while. You know, I mean, Ian Happ's probably one of the younger player reps that's out there, and he's obviously got a few years in the league. So, you know, I do think it's a little bit, and that's not a matter of both sidesing the thing, but what I'm saying is a lot of the guys who are at the bargaining table on the players' perspective, and I know they had different bigger meetings. So I'm not trying to John Boy this thing, and trust me, I understand how this works, but that what the owners are taking advantage of that is what I'm saying, is by going in there and hoping that they can squeeze the guys at the low end and get the guys at the high end to ideally fall for some of this stuff, right? Like if they say, oh, hey, we'll raise the minimum to 610 and we'll lock it in there, thinking that the guys on the executive committee don't care about that because they're already making a ton of money. And they're thinking like, oh, we got a little bit of a win there. Cool. Because they've been able to do that before, the owners, that is, and rely on these players who are making a ton of money, but who want things like more room on the plane and a private chef that the team employs and things like that, right? So they're saying, yeah, that'd be awesome, when they then make a lot of concessions that actually end up hurting either them or their brethren who are at a lower level of the game and have not yet reached free agency. We talk about qualifying offers and things like that. So, you know, there's a couple of those things at play. I think, you know, the other issue here, right, as you mentioned the playoffs, but I don't know what the number is. It's like 140 or where that falls. But with most of those, say the regular season contracts, even, you know, there's a threshold at which the league can still get its full revenue from its broadcast rights. After a certain point, it becomes prorated. But I think it's like 140 games or whatever that is. So they could miss nearly a month of games and still get their full. And in that meantime, they're not paying those players. So now you're talking about, that's when they talk about those biblical losses and they didn't get the revenue from all this stuff. It's like, yeah, but you only had to pay 36% of the salaries also. You know what I mean? It's not like you paid 100% of those salaries and were out $200 million on your payroll. If you had a $200 million payroll, you only paid $72 million of it. So you saved another $128 million, you know what I mean, that you didn't have to pay out. So that 128 is going to mitigate a whole lot of the losses that you had from gate and concessions and that sort of thing. So there again, like we could talk about, oh man, you know, you'll miss a 10 home games. Yeah, but you know what you're not doing? You're not paying those players for those 20 games either. And that's pretty freaking big. So it's, you know, again, the owners are squeezing because they know, especially early on, they have nothing to lose. And the players have everything to lose in that period. So that's the part that worries me, because they can sit back and twiddle their thumbs and just wait on it. But I sincerely hope, again, that is also one of those things that the owners are sitting there also saying, hey, we're cool with it if we have to give this stuff up, but we're going to try our damnedest to make sure we don't have to give it up. So we know what this drop dead is, which I'm sure they do, right? I mean, probably both sides, but the owners in particular probably know exactly what it's going to take and when they can, like, probably each day they have this knowing exactly how long it'll take to ramp up and get into it. So there's probably like a D-Day that they've got on their calendar that they say, well, shit, if things aren't done, okay, yeah, we can make a final proposal. But right now, I don't think either side is at that point where they're ready to do a take it or leave it. So until that happens, you know, and we're getting pretty freaking close to it because we're only like 2 weeks out from when spring training report date should start. So, man, it's getting there.
Oops. Yeah, exactly. So the median salary in Major League Baseball is about $1 million, a little bit over $1 million.
1.15, I believe.
And so that is your, right around 450. There's a little over 900 players on Major League Baseball rosters. And so that means half of the players in Major League Baseball make less than that. And I know all of us kind of are sitting here saying, oh my God, that's such a big number, these things. And again, you have to take into consideration the amount of money these people haven't been making to be able to get to that point. And then how short a career is. Average career is under 3 years. And so I know we all think $1 million is a lot of money, but if you spread that over someone's life, it's actually not that much money. And so that's the way I always think of it is, all right, well, these players have a finite career that's averaging 3 years, and if the median salary over those 3 years is $1 million a year, so $3 million. And, if most people earn 3 million, let's see, $3 million divided by, what do we work, like 40 years? If you're
somewhere in
lucky,
there. Yeah.
that's $75,000 a year. So that's not that much money, okay, for you to, on average, for your entire career, earn $75,000 a year. So you could think of it as you start at 30, you start at 40, you start at 50, and then you only ever get up to, whatever that average would be. But that's not spectacular. That's fairly average for somebody with a college degree. And so when you're talking about these people that have these talents that have committed their lives to playing this, and now they're getting kind of, manipulated by these billionaires who want to focus, who want everybody to focus on the Max Scherzers and the guys who have these huge contracts, the Mike Trouts, things like that. But that's not really what this is about. And I think that's what the players union is trying to say, is like that this isn't about those guys. And it's not. At the end of the day, it's not at all.
Right. And because both sides of this, though, do, like, the player side wants those younger guys to make more money. The owner side wants those guys to make less money because then it helps to offset, like we said, the top guys. But and like you said too, the median's like 1.15. But if you've only got a 2 or 3 year career, chances are you're never coming close to that $1 million level. You know what I mean? You're at that minimum, that 570, and you may not even be making that over a whole season. Right? If you're bouncing back and forth between the minors, yeah, you're on that major league pay scale for that time when you're up, right? And you might be up for a few weeks, and then back down. You might be up for a week and down. Maybe you're September, and maybe, you know what? How many of those guys are going to be a September call up and never make it back? And they were making $5,000 a year at the low levels of the minors. Maybe they made it up there, and maybe they stuck around long enough that they're signing a minor league free agent deal, and they're making, $100,000, a couple $100,000, but by that point, what are you, 25 to 30 years old, somewhere in there? And, at the point where normally you'd be establishing yourself elsewhere. And, hey, yeah, is it possible that they've got really strong ties and they had some things going on in the community? Maybe they played in college and they've got some ties that way, but it's not as if you're talking about the guy who's able to then go out. Again, we'll use Ian Happ as an example, right? Happ's got his deal with the coffee thing and Obvious Shirts. He's got his podcast. He's got all these other endorsements and things going on. But if you're just some dude who bounces up and, then you retire eventually, do you have enough cachet that all of a sudden you're going to just walk into a bunch of local endorsements and have somebody who wants to pay you a ton of money to be kind of a token salesperson at their car dealership? I'm just making stuff over their insurance.
That's what it comes down to, though.
I know. And that's what a lot of the guys, but that's what they're going to end up doing. They're going to go back home. They're going to be, they're going to be coaches. Maybe they work at a facility. We've got some guys around here that do that, which is, and a lot of those guys are the best coaches because, again, they had to grind through it, right? That's the guy I really want as a coach, the guy to whom it didn't really come easy because he knows how much he had to fight for it. But it's not as if they're just walking out of that job and into one that's still paying them $500,000 a year. You know what I mean? Like, they're going back and becoming regular people. And it's just some dude like if I said to you, and this is a guy from back in the day, but if I said the name Bill Sampson, most people aren't going to know who Bill Sampson is. I mean, he led the Expos in wins in like 1992 when they had Dennis Martinez and Oil Can Boyd. But, and Bill pitched for a couple teams, but he owns the facility that's over here, right? And that's what he does now. And he's a former major leaguer. But there are way more Bill Sampans out there and dudes who played for a few years in the league and maybe had some varying degrees of success, and he was pretty good when he pitched. But there's a hell of a lot more of those guys than there are your Clayton Kershaws who could walk away today and never have to work another day in his life. And he could travel and vacation every single day and it wouldn't matter, right? But I think that's what they're trying to look out for, is how can you protect that a little bit more. But those guys, again, they're the ones, but honestly though, who gets screwed is the dudes in the middle, because where it's really tough now is if you're that guy who's like 33, 34, 35, you still got talent, you still could make a team, but you're no longer making the minimum. So you're going to have to get
Frank Schwindel and Patrick Wisdom.
Well, those guys are cool because they're still in the minimums, though. I'm talking about the guys who have made it past. I'm talking about the guys who've gotten past that, who now would be, or let's say it's Frank Schwindel when he gets to the end of that. He might still be pretty good, but if he's going to command $2 or $3 million or something like that, no team's going to pay him that when they can, because they want to get this guy who they can pay $500,000 or $600,000 to. So it's really those guys like, and I say the middle, like $3 to $5 million is not the middle. That's your Daniel Descalso, who the Cubs managed to give a job to, which is still awesome. But those are the guys who are going to end up getting squeezed because we got to pay these guys a ton of money. We have to pay them because they're elite. Now we got to get as many cheap players as we can over here. Sorry, buddy, you guys in the middle, you're still a good baseball player. You could still probably contribute, but we don't want to pay you the extra $2 million that it'll take because we've got to have all these guys down here and we got to keep them really cheap too. So, it's a weird deal, man. It's a weird deal. And
so because you've got half the players that are at $1 million or under, that's what the owners are really trying to do, is they're trying to squeeze those guys so that they can become a louder voice, so that they can start saying to the union, hey, you know what? Let's move forward. And then you start to create
division. We're cool with 610. We're cool with that. Yep.
And then you start to create division. And that's what the owners want to do, is they want there to be division within the union. They want the guys who are on the bottom to turn against the guys who are, on the top, basically. So that's the plan. I don't think it's working. But who knows? Behind closed doors, you never know what's happening. But more importantly, if we continue to kind of bump along here, it seems like they could pull the trigger any day and get past this. So it's like, is there an impact to spring training right now? It looks like, without knowing what the status of these negotiations are, there could be, but I would say right now there's no real impact to spring training. If they were to get a deal, I feel like they could announce a deal within the next week to 10 days if they wanted to.
Yeah, and still have something happen. I mean, I don't think there's enough. When you think about it, like most of this, here's what's funny too. Like we talk about the CBA. And if you ever looked at the CBA, like it's an extensive agreement.
I have a copy of it on my hard drive.
Yeah, no, and I think I probably do somewhere too, because I know I've had it. I've downloaded it to look for certain things that are in there and try to look at certain rules and regulations of it. A vast majority of it is just a bunch of silly legalese that nobody will ever wrangle over, that doesn't ever change, because it's so basic and boring, and it's just like certain report dates and things like that,
dotting the I's and crossing the T's type stuff,
and then none of that'll be up for debate at all. You can ratify that with no problem. It's like these 4 or 5 little things and the offshoots of them that are the really big sticking points. But really, when you get down to it, though, it's not like the players want a $500 million CBT threshold, and the owners are like, no, we only want 108. Although the owners did want to bring it down to like 180 or something like that, which was just insane. just when you look at like inflation alone, you can't bring it down by 30 million. But I think their thought was, we'll put in $100 million floor, which is still, I like the floor, but you can't lower the ceiling at that point. But those things are really big, and those are the ones though that they can drag their heels on. At the same time, and I think we're on the same page with this, it does give me hope that a decision can actually be reached quickly, because it doesn't feel as though there's a list of 100 things that they need to check everything off of. It feels like, and everybody knows what the issues are, and that if they really wanted to, they could just say, yep, cool. The owners in particular could concede on a couple things and very easily move this forward without a whole lot of fanfare. I mean, there are some other things. I mean, I think it's granted that the playoffs will expand, but maybe not to the extent that the owners want, right? So it's where you agree there. The owners want, I think, like 16 teams or whatever, and I think the players saying 14 is the most we would do, and I think universal DH is a given. But
how do you feel about that? Personally, for me, I didn't like the expanded playoffs when they did it in 2020. I don't like the NFL expanded playoffs personally. I think it dilutes the product at the end of the year, and to me, it just doesn't make any sense.
I don't like in baseball, like in football, like I didn't like when they expanded football and just gave the number 1 seed. I like when the 1 and 2 both got a bye when they did it that way. I just felt like that made more sense. And then you had 4 teams playing, and that goes down, and then you play into it. Like, why is the 1 team getting 1? You push these out. And if you're talking about like 1 team getting a bye, if you're talking about teams like picking their opponents, part of me kind of likes that, because it's definitely bulletin board material for the team that they picked that can get really pissed off about it. You know what I mean? And you want to go in and kick their ass. But I think teams, I don't know that teams would want to pick their opponent because of that very thing. Because if you pick your opponent, you say, this is a team that we know we can beat, and then you get beat, now you look like an idiot. In addition to being a loser. But I don't like the expansion unless, and I don't like the idea of going to 8, but at least if you do, every team has to play. It's such a tremendous, although, there again, anytime you can give an advantage to someone for trying to compete, I think is good. And so there is, I think, an idea in there that if you said there are 8, and I know it could dilute it, but if you're also saying, hey, enough teams will make it in that, there's more of an incentive to make it to that playoffs. And if 8 teams can make it in, maybe you have fewer teams trying to tank because it doesn't take as much to get there. And then you could perhaps go on a run and make something happen. So if they feel like that would create, while the actual playoff portion of it might be a little bit more diluted, if the regular season becomes more competitive as a result, then I think that would be something the players might be looking to do. The problem is the players know damn well that it's about having more revenue for owners by having expanded playoffs. That's why the owners want it. The owners don't really want it for the competitive nature of it. They want to make more money. So, and then the players. So, but I would say if the players counter with that, say, well, okay, then you create a larger bonus pool for players. That might be something they would be able to agree on then, to say, hey, you make the playoffs, you automatically get X share, and we can make more money from it. That would make some sense. But if you do it, as long as it's not like the NBA, because I hated it when the NBA went to 7-game series in every round of the playoffs. Like the NBA playoffs seem like this interminable slog to me. There's just like, oh God, they're only in the second round, and by the time they get to it, it's like play a game, take 2 days off and play a game. And then, that just sucks. But it's so tough for baseball, man. It's such a long season. Now you're asking those pitchers to go that much more and to really get at it gets tough for me, man. That's
so. Is it so? What they did last year, I think, was 5 teams made the playoffs, right? You had 2 wild cards.
Back to the regular. I mean, they expanded the year before because they pushed it out to like 7 or whatever. And I think they won.
It was basically half.
Yeah, and I think the owners want 8. There's 16 total.
What would you think about
8 per league?
What would you think about? So, like, I kind of think it'd be interesting if they did something like this, where they had, let's say, they did 7 teams, and you did kind of like I don't know if you watch soccer, but the Champions League, how they basically play in a like a division almost. You like redivision it, right? So you have the American League, 7 teams, the National League, 7 teams, and they all play each other, let's say, twice.
No, you do it like a pool play. It'd be like a youth
and then the
pool,
2 teams that are left at the top of that, at the end of all that, move on. Or 4 teams, or however you wanted to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ways like I devised, this was like this is in the 2020 season when they're talking about doing something. I was like, just give me some wild chaos with it. And you
Yeah,
say,
exactly.
we're going to we're going to let 8 teams in, but 4 of them will take, or you take the 3 division winners and you take the other 5, and then you make that, or whatever it is, you take the 3 division winners and 1 wild card, right? But then you make the other 4 play into like, I don't know what happens. You know what I mean? Like I forget how I made that work, but it was a weird, and with some 1 gamers and stuff like that. Like I don't like, especially in baseball, I don't like the idea of just the 1 game thing. And part of that's as a fan, I hate it because it's like it's so nerve wracking. But as if my team's not in it, then it's pretty exciting because it's do or die, win or go home. It's like a game 7, except it's just a single game. But you can't do that with higher seeds, so then, how do you end up doing it? Right. So if you go to 7, do you give a couple of them a bye? Do you let 3 division winners out of your 7 division winners move on? And then you take the other 4 teams and you have 2 separate, so here's 2 separate wild card games. And then the winners of that play 1 game, and the winner of that moves in to play the number 1 seed overall, and the other 2, 3, because now you've gotten your 1, 2, 3 different wild card 1 game craziness, like the NCAA play in, and here you go. I mean, there's ways you could do it, that you could still reward teams, but
I've never
you're
felt like
not
the 1
giving them too
game
much.
playoff does much for me. Like, I I mean, the Cubs have kind of been on both sides of that, and I mean, obviously, when they beat the Pirates, that was thrilling, just because the Cubs have not had a lot of playoff success. But short of that, I've never
The
been a
game they
huge
played against the
fan.
Rockies was like one of the most painful, awkward
It's like, wasn't it like
losses.
1-0?
Yeah, it was so gross, or 2-1 or whatever it was. And it was
Yeah, it
after they had
was.
lost game 163 and they were like stumbling at it was just like, it was so ugly. But there again, I mean,
It's
if
like
to me
watching a
though,
really drunk guy try to walk.
yeah, or like watching Tony La Russa do his his roadside sobriety test, but and try to do his alphabet backwards. But I also think, if you're letting all these extra teams in, then you shouldn't reward them with this opportunity to, and I guess it is still an opportunity even with 1 game, but don't give them the 3 game thing. Don't drag that out anymore. Like use that as fodder to fuel the wild beast, right? Like it's like the Coliseum and stuff. Hey, go in there. Here's your sword, last man standing kind of thing. And have those 4 teams play off for 1 spot to get in, because they're not division winners. You get the
Yeah.
reward for winning the division, and then if you don't, you still have this opportunity to get there, and you still could make some noise. I mean, a team could come out of that and rally through it and then go in, but you're giving those 3 division winners a chance to take a couple days, rest up their rotation, and you are forcing those other teams. If a team's going to make it into that out of that wild card spot, they're going to have to burn a couple starters. It's going to be very difficult, and they've got an uphill battle, but I think it should be that way. But at the same
And the
time,
teams
you're
with
letting some
better
teams in.
records, they get the home field advantage,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Yeah, I think there's definitely an interesting way to do it, but I think just expanding the number of teams in the current kind of setup, to me, doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got to do something different. And I would like for them to find a way to, I understand the novelty and the excitement that they want to bring. I do actually like that they try to set up all the games on the last day, barring weather and such things, to be at the same time.
Yeah.
And I know that's kind of to discourage tanking, or, and to try to keep teams from coasting in if they can still secure different positions. So I understand kind of the need or the desire there. But if there's a way that you can do it that A, discourages tanking, or at least encourages competitiveness. Certain teams, if you're 40 games out, it's not going to matter. But if you can have a race for those last couple of spots, and that'll encourage, you think about it, like if you're 3 or 4 games out, but there's still a week to play, okay, you've got to, and we've seen, man. I mean, look at what the Nats did. Look at what the Braves did. The Braves lost Ronald Acuna Jr., and it's very interesting stuff around him, speaking of, with a new method involved in ACL reconstruction. that I found very fascinating that I read about yesterday. And actually, the surgeon responsible for that followed me on Twitter yesterday, which I thought was
Look
very
at you.
cool. Yeah. He's only got like 400 followers, so it's not like it's up, but it was neat, you know. Having had my own ACL reconstructed, I found it fascinating. But they lost Acuna. They went out, they were only like a game and a half or half game, whatever. They were right there with the Cubs and the Cardinals. All like, and they acquired Jock Peterson, and like people were like, hey dude, don't get settled in. Like, you're probably gonna get traded because we're gonna fall out of it. And they ended up going on a tear, and then they won the World Series. So I mean, there is, and that's where I wish, you know, again, we look at what the Cubs did, and it was like, oh, they had to do all this. I was like, well, you know, I mean, the Cardinals were tied with the Cubs, and the Braves were like a half game separate from them. Two of those teams made the playoffs. One of them won the World Series, right? So you can't just sit there and say, well, hey, you're a couple games back, you better go ahead and punt now. So whatever incentive you can give to get teams to go for it at the deadline and to try to push and to try to hold on to players, I am all for. And if there's a way to do that with those expanded playoffs, I get it. Although at the same time, you can look at it and say, well, still a 1-game crapshoot. So great, we made it, but what the hell, man? Our chances of advancing past that are slim. So, yeah, I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So the Cubs have made like you get this email from the Cubs that talk about all these baseball ops changes, scouting changes. My God, like reading through that thing was like a job in and of itself. So many different changes to their organizational structure, and people moved around. I'm not sure there were a lot of new people brought in. I think there were some new people brought in, but a lot of different title changes and responsibilities changing, things like that. What do you make of all of that? I mean, is it like, I mean, it was such a it's so big, is so many people were
That's
involved.
what she said. Yeah, that sounds like my that orgy that I had a few years ago. No, sorry if my wife's listening to this that didn't actually have, or my parents, either way.
Kids.
Yeah, that definitely never ever happened. Although I won't get into that. When I was invited to a swingers club one time when I was working at Applebee's, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, it's like a playground thing, right? Yeah, I mean, it's I think typical stuff, you know, that if we weren't directly involved with covering the Cubs and stuff, that it would be like,
if there was something going on
all the time. Yeah,
if there were actually player transactions, like spring training was getting ready to start.
Yeah, and it's kind of, you know, I mean, Matt Dory moving over to player personnel from which is interesting because that's kind of the same move that Jason McLeod made, because he went from running the player development side to player personnel, which is more of a major league type thing. Because the development wasn't going well. I don't think that's the case with Dory. I think it's just a matter of they've got some other things in place. But you know what I was interested in, and again, this is partially fueled by the lack of any other information anywhere else. But I had somebody reached out to me that same morning, whenever that was that Wednesday that they announced that. I think it was, or maybe it was Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday. So. It was that same, whatever that same day was. But I had just written something earlier that morning that Adam Beard, who had been their director of high performance, which is more like the, you know, kind of the physical, for lack of a better term, you know, trainer type, right? So all the workouts and stuff like that they do. So physical performance is high performance, but otherwise, they had hired him from the Browns a couple years before. But I had gotten word that he was not going to continue with the organization. And so, you know, and somebody asked me about, and I couldn't find anything. There was nothing about it out there anywhere. So, and this person had found out about it. They're in that industry, and had been made aware of it, and had made me aware of it. And then I subsequently was it's cool to be cited in the Athletic. They wrote about that a little bit. I got name dropped in the Athletic because the one article that I've actually written for them was under a Cubs Insider byline and not even my own name. So it might be the first time I've actually appeared on those pages with my name, but it was interesting that they're moving on from him, and I don't believe they're directly replacing him. Obviously, they didn't mention him in that other round of things, but it came right after they were talking about the new offseason workout kind of training program that they've got in place. And so I do think that as we talk about those changes you had mentioned, it's more just like sort of realigning things or reconfiguring them a little bit as they continue, with the restructure that happened with the hitting and pitching sides with Craig Breslow and Justin Stone taking over those areas respectively, and kind of aligning those things moving forward with some various different implementations to where I think it's less. I don't want to say it's less about needing direct oversight. That's definitely not it. But I think they are a little bit more aligned top to bottom throughout the organization on a few different tracks. And then now it's like, okay, this thing's moving along really well. Now we got to kind of shift people around a little bit to make sure that the responsibilities match up with what we're trying to do. And I don't know if there's, but it's like, there's so many of them. Like once you get down to the bottom couple of paragraphs, I'm like, they're like programmers and stuff. And I'm like, I mean,
it felt like it was more for the people.
It was like watching the credits of a movie. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like you get down here like Stringer, best boy grip for the Australian outpost team.
The accountant.
Like, look, Mom, I made it, which is cool. I mean, hell, I just said, I just thought it was cool that I saw my name in the athletics doing the same thing. Like those folks are not going to be nobody outside of like those people and their families and their coworkers are going to know about them in terms of working for a major league club. So that is kind of cool. But I do think, again, it looks like we're seeing very much of a continued shift toward like the analytical data focused stuff. And they're always going to use scouts. I think the Cubs are more heavily into actual in-person scouting than some other teams who have gotten away from that. But again, I think they want to get as many people in there who can crunch those numbers, work those tables and the databases and put all that stuff in there and create models and then pass those up the line, right, to the guys who are making those decisions. And I say guys because there's not a whole lot of women on that list, which is a little unfortunate.
True.
But hopefully that'll continue to change. They need as many bright minds as they can.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see. I mean, I think if anything, it's more of a nod towards, hey, we're getting away from kind of what Epstein built, so to speak, right? It's like I
wasn't making that face at you. Sorry, I was looking at a comment.
more of a transition away from the Theo Epstein years and into maybe building off of what he had established in terms of a foundation, but trying to kind of move away from where they were with Theo in charge.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting some different personalities, different input, that sort of thing into this. I think that's, and we've spoken about this, but they got a little stagnant, I think, in their thought process. They had a process that worked, and they didn't really do enough to, not that they didn't do enough to reevaluate and move forward to that process. And I think that's what we're seeing, even with these minor leaguers. And what you see is it's in addition to really trying to ramp up being more aggressive from a physical standpoint, which sounds really funny to say, right? Like every time you say this, like every time you talk about it out loud or I write about it, I'm like, this sounds really weird to be like, they're really trying to amp up their velocity for their pitchers. It's like, well, no shit. They should have been, they just figured that out. These guys need to throw harder, but they had been very, very conservative.
Hey, I got an idea.
Yeah. Hey, this is wild. I think we should get our pitchers to throw harder and get nastier stuff and have better command. Oh, you're hired.
Hey, like, problem solved.
Like, no shit. Where were you 5 years ago, right? 10 years ago. But they weren't doing that. They were being very conservative with it. And that's continued to grow. And now they're being much more there's a much better focus on physical strength and explosiveness and athleticism, which again, like, yeah, that's what it should be. Like baseball players are athletes. That's not this.
And fans and the press and bloggers all tend to focus in on those guys that are at the top of the food chain, right? But at the end of the day, this comes down to who your personnel are, and who it is that's down there working with the players on a daily basis. Who is setting the regimens, who's setting the dietary needs and restrictions, who's, doing the workouts, all those things that lead to kind of the things the Theo Epsteins and the Jed Hoyers take credit for.
Yeah. And I think there's also, and there is an aspect of this that is about camaraderie and bringing those guys together. When we had Max Bain on the show, remember when you're asking, we said, you know, how many guys are there right now? And he said there were like 100 minor league players in the facility at the time, you know, and I know they had this special program that's going on for like 30 of them or so. But there's more guys than that down there. But I think that's a big part of it too, is like you can go work out on your own, right? And I've done that before. And even though like right now my workout buddy is my 13-year-old son, but there is something to be said for having someone there that you can push and who can push you. And if that's a group or if that's one more or two more people, if you're able to do that in a setting and everybody's, you know, rowing together, so to speak, in the same direction, you can get a lot more done than if you're just stuck in, you know, look at Craig Kimbrell or whatever, throwing to a cardboard cutout in his barn, right? It's just a different deal. So I think they are putting a lot of emphasis on the mental side of things as well, which I think is really smart, because if you have those guys come up and they want to work together and they want to build something together, they're able to push and pull one another. You know, that's important. I think the Cubs see the value in that, and I'm glad they do. I'm glad they're, for as much as they're into the analytical stuff, they understand like the chemistry, psychological side of stuff as well, which is they've always been big on, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of the young players down at the spring training facility, I went down there yesterday with my son, and we played a little catch, and I wanted to see if there were any players. Did not see one player out there, but I noticed that they had taken all the player pictures off the walls, and I tweeted that out from the Cubs Insider Twitter account, and Rich Beisterfeld responded that that was something that they had done, I guess, towards the end of the summer. But it was just so weird to go down there because, you know, I live here in Phoenix, and I'm at that facility frequently throughout the year. And to just see absolutely no player pictures, it was just it felt dirty. And I know that Rich said that had happened like kind of like towards the end of the summer, and maybe it was because obviously they play. Who are they going to put up there? Patrick Wisdom.
Yeah. They don't even have his picture. You know what I mean? Like they don't have a picture. They don't have Frank the Tank Schwindel. He wasn't even in the organization at the time.
Yeah,
so.
and like who are they going to put up now? I mean, like obviously there's this whole push with the lockout to kind of exclude player profiles and everything from MLB websites, and so I thought that maybe that's what it was. But you could definitely see a case for the Cubs just being like, you know, I mean, who do we put up there?
Yeah, there's Andre Dawson, Ryan Sandberg, Billy Williams, Fergie Jenkins, like it's all the old guys, you know. But
yeah, so it'll be interesting to see that if spring training does happen. I mean, I guess it's going to happen in some way, shape, or form. Let's touch on that just quickly. If it gets kicked down the road, let's say that there's not an agreement for another. I mean, I would think that I'd be surprised if this went past the end of February, wouldn't you?
I wouldn't be surprised, but I do think here's my thing. If it's not figured out by mid-February, I think we see it drag on a lot longer. That's my thought, is if it can't get done, because if theoretically, like if they got it done in mid-February, they'd only really have to shave off a couple games. You know what I mean? Like just everybody reports immediately after that, get down there and go.
And you could probably still work it all out. You could squeeze it in. You could, you know, off days.
You know, you gotta,
like that,
you know, I mean,
season a little longer.
Yeah, and I mean the main guys don't even play that much in the first couple weeks or the last week anyway. You know, there's that kind of second, third week of it where they get their time. But
yeah,
that's my thought though, is if they can't get it done by mid-February, I do think it stretches for a while, because I think these sides are going to dig in. You know, I don't think the owners have a real serious, like they don't really give a shit about the money from spring training. I think. And I don't think they put a lot of stock in spring training as a fan service thing the fans will get pissed off about. But I would be very, very concerned if it's not done by March 15th, because now we're talking about putting the regular season in jeopardy. And if at that point, but yeah, if it's February 15th, I think it goes for at least another month past that, and we miss a lot of spring training and some of the regular season.
Well, and spring training is like the only thing some families can't afford to go to these days. You know, I mean, it's like,
and even that's getting pretty tight.
Yeah, I mean, because you have to travel here.
Yeah.
But for people that are local, I mean, you know, it's a fun thing to go to. It's just it's kind of how baseball used to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, before it turned into, you know, trying to maximize revenue in these ridiculous ticket prices. I mean, like you can't really go bring a family of four to a Cubs game for under $500.
Yeah, it's,
you know, it's tough.
It's pricey, and that's why it makes having those games even more important because, you know, they're televised, right? Like we can at least watch the games. But if it's literally out of sight, it will literally be out of mind. Like they're already pushing them. Like it's difficult now, right? When we know we need to come up with content, it's very difficult for me to even force stuff out there content wise because there's so little that's actually going on. And so if you talk about just the nominal fan who isn't involved in it, who's, you know, maybe they're a football fan too, and they're catching up with that. There's college basketball, there's the NBA, there's the NHL, there's all these other things. They're just getting on Netflix and chilling, right? Anything that you could do other than and the longer they go with that hype in November was cool, man. It was great, but that has faded long since, and nobody gives a shit about how active it was up till December 1st. And so at this point, you're risking a lot because it is very, very difficult to gain back that momentum that you've lost. Like they have to restart. And as I said, if you do that mid-February, you follow immediately after the Super Bowl, football's over, there's no college football, there's no NFL. If you can get it going again and you can get that crazy free agency period right in there leading into spring training, you can make that happen, I think they can still recoup a lot of that and it'll be as if there was no issue whatsoever. But if they skip that and miss that time, man, that is very, very valuable. And I'm not sure how long it's going to take them to get it back if they ever can.
True. By the way, best new Twitter follow is Dick Butkus.
Yeah. He's awesome. I got a reply from him the other day. I was like, oh, it's Dick Butkus reply. I was like, it's Dick Butkus. But he's hilarious. It's great. Yes. He's got just the right touch of senile old man, but being like self-aware of it too, you know, just being a goober. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, he had a tweet. I don't know if you saw. He said, I step away for one day, and God forbid I don't comment on the new head coach and GM, and I've got people in my yard making sure I'm okay. He then followed it up with the never mind, it's just the landscapers tweet.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay.
That's great.
I need simple entertainment. You know, I'm a simple man, but anyways. All right. Well, we'll circle back on all this stuff sometime next week, probably in a week. I'd love to be, once the season starts rolling, we'll start doing these webcasts, you know, at least twice a week for most weeks. But, you know, until there's actually something to cover, we don't want you guys just to listen to us ramble on over nothing. Although that's basically what we do most of the time anyways.
What it would be anyway.
But be less of nothing. A secret.
Yeah. My bad. Just gave it away. Shit. There go the subscribers.
Damn, we're busted. All right, cool. You guys have a great weekend. And we'll see you guys next week. See you.
See you, everybody.